The dawn came late to that stretch of prairie, dragging its colorless light across the land as if reluctant to wake it. Frost still clung to the sagebrush, and the grass lay beaten flat by a night wind that had not yet lost its temper. A single figure moved through it, slow, deliberate, heavy, as if each step cost something. His shadow stretched long and misshapen in the weak Sunday. They called him the Giant, though no one had spoken that word to his face in years. Men muttered it at saloons, in the pauses between card hands, voices low as if the sound might conjure him. They said he once threw a man clear across a corral, that he broke another's arm just for looking too long. They said his mother died in childbirth and his father drank himself to death, and that maybe all the violence of both had settled in the son's heart. But he was just a man, walking now through a field of brittle grass, his breath showing pale against the cold. His name was Eli Warren. His coat was torn at one shoulder where the stitching had given way, and the brim of his hat sagged from rain that never seemed to stop. A rifle hung from his saddle, though there was no horse now, just the empty leather scabbard swaying at his side. Somewhere along the trail, the animal had gone lame and been left to die. He hadn't looked back. A creek ran ahead, thin as a vein, its surface filmed with ice. Eli knelt beside it and broke through the crust with his gloved hand. The clean crack of it cut through the morning like the first note of a hymn. He cupped the water and drank, his throat burning as if it were fire instead of cold. He had been riding for 6 days without aim, leaving behind a town that would not miss him and a name that carried more curses than blessings. There were things he could not undo: the saloon brawl, the man lying still in the sawdust, the look on the sheriff's face when he said, "You best keep going, Eli." So it did. The sky above him widened, an endless pale ocean. To the west, mountains rose like old bones, streaked with snow. The sight should have filled him with something: fear, hope, awe, but he felt only the dull ache that had taken root behind his ribs long ago. He walked until the sun was higher and his legs trembled. He found an abandoned homestead near a stand of cottonwoods, the roof half collapsed, and the chimney leaning like a man too tired to pray. Smoke stains still marked the hearth, and a child's shoe, long rotted, sat near the doorway. Eli stood there a long while, not crossing the threshold. It was not his place, but neither was the world beyond it. He finally stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and old wood. A bird fluttered from the rafters, scattering silence in its wake. Eli lowered himself to the floor, leaning against the wall, and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he let the sound of nothing fill him. He might have stayed that way forever if not for the noise, a faint cry, somewhere beyond the trees. Not the wind, not an animal, a child. Eli rose, his knees stiff. The sound came again, sharper now, desperate. He pushed through the underbrush, following it. There, half hidden beneath a fallen wagon, lay a girl no older than 8, her face streaked with dirt, her hands raw and trembling. She looked at him as if he were death itself. He froze. She was thin, bones showing through her small frame, her lips cracked. Her dress was torn, her boots far too big. "What happened?" he asked, his voice rough, unused to kindness. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Her eyes rolled once, then closed. Eli knelt and lifted the wagon wheel just enough to pull her free. She was light as a bundle of twigs. He wrapped her in his coat, feeling the faint flutter of her heart against his chest. Back in the cabin, he laid her near the hearth and struck a match. The fire came slow, coughing smoke before catching. The warmth filled the air with the smell of pine and old ash. He found a tin cup and melted snow, forcing her to sip. She stirred, coughed once, and whispered something he almost didn't catch. "Pa." Eli stared. The word hit him like a bullet. He almost dropped the cup. She opened her eyes then, gray, unblinking, filled with some old knowing beyond her years. "Pa," she said again, quieter this time. Then she drifted back into sleep. Eli sat there, watching the fire climb and fall, the girl breathing soft beside it. He wanted to correct her, to say she was wrong, that he was nobody's father, that any child calling him such would be cursed. But the word hung in the room like a fragile truth he couldn't break. Outside, the wind rose again, whistling through the cracks in the boards, carrying with it the scent of snow. Eli fed the fire and waited for it to hold. He would wait until morning, he decided. Then he'd take her somewhere safe if such a place still existed. But as the night deepened and her breathing steadied, something old and restless began to stir inside him. It was not mercy. Not yet. But perhaps the start of it. Morning came brittle and blue, the kind that turns breath to lace and makes every sound carry farther than it ought. He woke first, stiff from the floorboards, and fed the coals with slivers of pitch pine until the fire found its color again. The girl slept with his coat tucked under her chin, one hand open against the plank as if she had been holding something that the night had taken away. A streak of pale hair had fallen across her forehead. He pushed it gently aside and felt the small heat of her skin. When she stirred, she looked at him the way hungry birds look at a hand, ready to fly or feed. He set the tin cup near her. She drank with tight, careful sips, as if each might vanish before it touched her tongue. "What do they call you?" he asked at last. She blinked slow. "Lark," she said, like she worried it might not be the right answer. He nodded. He pointed to the door. "There is wood to fetch, water beyond, and the roof is hungry for new shingles. We can do it slow." She looked toward the doorway with a flinch in her shoulders that had nothing to do with cold. He said nothing to that. He gathered his hat and a length of rope, found an old axe beneath a wasp nest, and knocked the dead paper down with a stick. He moved easy, showing her he meant no harm, not by saying it, but by letting the work speak. They began with the roof. He showed her the ladder made from 2 saplings and broken rungs. He climbed first, testing each step with his weight, then handed up cedar shakes scavenged from a fallen shed. The wind pushed at them in gusts, teasing the edge of the pine smoke out through the gaps. She tried to hide her trembling hands, but he saw. He pressed the back of one shake against his palm so it would not blow away and held it steady for her to set the nail. She missed the first strike and did not look at him. The second time the nail seated clean and true. The sound of it carried into the sky like a small declaration. A few more, and she began to breathe with the rhythm of it. Back on the ground, he showed her the creak and the trick of breaking the morning ice with the blunt of the axe instead of the edge. She followed the movement with narrowed eyes, soaking it up like a thirsty plant. When they filled the bucket, its handle cut into her palms. He took most of the weight without making a show of it, and let her keep the end nearest the cabin so she felt useful. Her steps steadied. They ate what he had, which was not much. A heel of stale bread he softened with broth. A strip of dried venison he split into thin threads so it looked like more. She pressed half the meat back into his hand. That told him plenty. He did not argue. Through the day he talked in small shapes, the way men do when the truth is hard to hold all at once. He told her he had once kept bees with his mother, that he had learned the patience of smoke and the quiet of waiting from those small golden bodies. He told her there had been a creek like this near the place he grew up, and he had learned the smell of spring thaw by watching the water change from black glass to moving mirror. He did not say the name of his father. He did not say the word whiskey. He did not say the way a house can learn to hush when a man turns mean. She listened, with her chin tucked in his coat collar, her eyes on the fidgeting fire. When she spoke, it was in the thin wire of a voice rarely used. There had been a wagon. Her uncle had taken her after her mother passed, and they were headed toward the promise of copper in the hills where the ground bled green. A wheel gave way. The men went to find help, and she tried to fix the axle with a jack too big for her arms. The wagon slipped and pinned her. She had shouted until her throat felt salted. No one came. Then he did. "It is luck," he said. She shook her head. "Maybe it is something else." In the afternoon he showed her the snare line and the places rabbits like to lay their paths, the soft runs through grass that most folks miss. He set the noose with her small hand guiding the bend, and the two of them left it, knowing they had asked the world for a thing without any guarantee. He made a shallow garden bed near the cabin wall where the sun held on the longest, turning the soil with a shovel whose handle had split and been bound in rawhide that had outlived the hands that tied it. She watched him work until the watching turned to doing. She pressed her fingers into the dirt and sniffed it like bread. The smell woke something good in her face. Late, when the light went the color of copper and then bled to iron, a rider skimmed the edge of the cottonwoods and paused, far enough to be safe, near enough to be seen. Eli felt the old weight settle across his shoulders. that slow certainty that trouble finds what can least afford it. The rider sat a while, the horse stamping frost-brittle grass, then turned and was gone, as if a thought had changed its mind. "We will bank the fire high tonight," he said. "Is that man yours?" she asked. "No," he said, and did not explain what that meant. After dark he carved. He drew from his pocket the small bone-handled knife that had belonged to his mother, a blade kept honed with a quiet devotion he afforded little else. He took a piece of cedar and peeled it down in thin curls that made the cabin smell like unveiled rain. He worked until a bird took shape in his palm, rough at first, then softer, the head bowed as if listening to something only it could hear. He set it on the hearth where the heat could season it. Lark watched without speaking, the firelight catching in her eyes. Before sleep he heard her say a grace so spare it felt like a breath. He did not add to it. He lay down on the hard floor near the doorway, hat over his eyes, the rifle within reach but not too close. Outside, the wind worked the trees, and something far off gave one long cry, and then none at all. In the dark he remembered his father's boots filling the doorway like a storm front. He remembered a quiet boy's hands cupped around a bee, waiting for it to find its way free. He remembered his mother's voice, humming a hymn that had no words, and all the words. He let those memories sit with him the way old horses stand together in bad weather, shoulder to shoulder, not asking more than presence. The cabin spoke in its small creaks. The child breathed. He kept watch with a patience he had not known he still owned. The days came slow after that, marked not by calendars, but by the small victories of survival. Each dawn, Eli woke to the hiss of wind sliding between the boards, to the faint sound of Lark turning in her sleep. The fire had to be coaxed back to life every morning, and the creek had to be broken again with the blunt of the axe. Routine made a kind of fragile peace between them, as though repetition might keep the ghosts away. The snow deepened one morning. It had fallen all night, thick and muffled, leaving the world bleached and quiet. Eli watched from the doorway as the first light caught on the drifts. He'd seen the land covered in dust, in ash, in blood, but never this clean. For a long moment he stood there, hat low, thinking of nothing except how the cold seemed to make every sound honest. Behind him, Lark sat at the table, an old crate turned on its side, drawing shapes in the frost that had gathered on the window. She had begun to speak more these past days, though still in the small, careful way of children who had learned silence too early. He had learned something similar, though through a different schooling. When she caught him watching, she smiled in that tentative way of hers, half shy, half brave. "You don't talk much," she said. He nodded once. "Don't need to. You ever laugh?" He considered that, the question landing in him heavier than she meant. "Not in a while," he said. She went back to her window frost, dragging her finger in slow, looping patterns. "Mama said folks who don't laugh turn to stone." He almost smiled then. "Maybe I'm halfway there." They spent the morning mending what could be mended, the latch on the door, a crack in the stovepipe, a broken handle on the shovel. Eli taught her how to pack the snow around the base of the cabin to keep the wind from slipping under. She listened, serious as a preacher, nodding each time, her small gloves stiff with cold. Around midday they checked the snares. A rabbit hung from one, stiff and clean in the freezing air. Lark stared at it too long, her mouth pressed thin. "You kill it?" she asked. "The wire did," Eli said. She hesitated, then touched the fur, soft as breath. "You ever hate having to?" He looked at her, and for a moment she seemed older than her years, like someone who'd seen too much too soon. "I used to," he said, "but hate don't make it easier." They brought it back, skinned it near the creek, and set the meat to stew with a handful of dried herbs Eli had found in a rusted tin. The smell filled the cabin, warm, honest, grounding. Lark sat close to the fire, tracing the carved cedar bird with her thumb. "It looks like it's waiting for something," she said. He leaned back, stretching his sore shoulders. "Maybe it is." "Like what?" He didn't answer. "Maybe forgiveness, maybe the past to stay buried, maybe just a place to belong." He didn't know which. The storm came that night, thick, relentless, wind howling like a wild thing trying to claw its way in. The cabin shuddered under it, snow sifting in through the roof's weak seams. Eli checked the fire twice, then again, every time certain the next gust would tear the chimney clean off. Lark lay wrapped in his coat, eyes wide open in the half-dark. "It sounds angry," she whispered. "It's just wind," he said. "Then why does it sound like it's looking for someone?" He looked toward the door. "Maybe it is." The night stretched long. The wind rose and fell, the walls answering with their creaks. At some hour past midnight, Lark's breathing slowed and steadied, and Eli let his own eyes close. For the first time in years, he dreamed not of fights or fire or his father's shadow, but of a field at dusk, bees moving through the air like drifting gold. By morning, the storm had passed. The world outside was bright, cruelly bright, the snow piled knee-high. Smoke from the chimney climbed in a straight line toward a pale Sunday. The quiet was so deep it felt sacred. Eli opened the door and stared across the whiteness. On the horizon, faint but certain, he saw it. A set of tracks, not theirs, leading toward the cabin from the woods. Fresh, not from a rider passing by, but from someone coming on foot. He stepped back inside, shut the door without sound, and went to the window. "Lark," he said quietly. She looked up from where she sat near the fire, her small hands cradling the wooden bird. "What is it?" "Stay close." Her eyes widened, reading something in his voice she'd never heard before. He reached for the rifle by the door, fingers steady, movements slow. He did not speak again. Outside, the sound came faint but clear, the crunch of boots on snow, drawing nearer, deliberate. The girl clutched the cedar bird tight enough to leave marks on her palm. Eli's heart thudded once, heavy as the world. Whoever it was, they had found him, and they were coming home. The first knock was not a knock at all. It was a dull, heavy thud, like a shoulder striking the door. The kind of sound made by someone too cold to wait for permission. Eli stood motionless, the rifle in his hands but not yet raised. Lark's breath came shallow behind him, her small fingers fisted in the hem of his coat. The second thud came louder, then a voice hoarse, thin, and edged with exhaustion. "Anyone in there? I need help." Not a sheriff's tone, not a bounty hunter's, neither. Eli waited still, every muscle braced. The wind outside had a way of twisting sound, turning friend to foe and mercy to trap. But then came a cough, wet and desperate, followed by the scrape of boots giving way in the snow. He unbarred the door with one motion. The man outside sagged against the frame, hat caked in ice, coat torn at the sleeve. His face was lost beneath frost and beard, but his eyes, gray like Lark's, caught the firelight as Eli pulled him in. He fell to his knees just inside the threshold, gasping as the heat hit him. "Thank God," the stranger murmured, voice shaking. "Been walking since yesterday. Thought I'd die out there." Lark hovered near the stove, uncertain. Eli lowered the rifle but did not set it aside. "Where from?" he asked. "Wagon trail to the east," the man said, rubbing his hands together. "I was with a party heading north. We lost one wagon in the storm. My niece—" He stopped, eyes darting. Then they fell on the girl. He went pale. "Lark?" The name cracked like a gunshot. The girl froze, her small hands trembling. "Uncle Ben?" Eli looked between them. The silence stretched taut as wire. The man's eyes filled quick with tears that steamed in the fire's glow. "Lord Almighty," he whispered, crawling forward on his knees. "We thought you gone, child. We searched the ravine. You—" His words fell apart as he reached her, clutching her shoulders with a trembling reverence. Lark stared back, confusion and fear mingling. She looked at Eli, as though asking what she was supposed to feel. Eli said nothing. He stepped back, the rifle hanging loose at his side. He'd known it from the moment the man spoke. The world had come for what it lost. Ben turned to him. "You found her," he said, wonder breaking through the weariness. "God bless you, sir. You saved my girl." Eli only nodded. The words felt too large for his mouth. He went to the window, looking out into the blinding white, hiding the storm that had begun inside him. They gave the man water, food, a place near the fire. He ate in silence, glancing at Lark every few moments as if afraid she'd vanish again. She sat beside him, but not close, her body still angled toward Eli, like a compass that hadn't yet found a new north. When the meal was done, Ben looked around the cabin. "You alone out here?" Eli nodded. Wasn't sure anyone lived this far from the line, Ben said. We came looking for copper, but the land took half our men before we found any. He hesitated. I owe you more than I can pay. Eli's eyes stayed on the fire. Don't owe me nothing. Ben studied him, something cautious in his look. You got a name, mister? Eli Warren. The silence after that name was sharp. The kind of silence that knows a story. Ben's face changed. Warren? He said slowly. There's talk of that name down near Fort Laramie. A fight, a killing. Eli's jaw tightened. Talk travels faster than truth. Ben nodded but did not press. He leaned back, weary. We'll head out when the storm lifts, he said, his hand resting on Lark's shoulder. Home south now. Got family waiting. At that word family, Lark's eyes lowered. She turned the cedar bird in her hands, thumb tracing the curve of its wing. When night came, Ben slept near the fire. Lark did not. She lay awake on the cot, staring at the low ceiling. Eli sat at the table, knife in hand, carving another small figure, a horse this time, head bowed mid-step. She spoke quietly. You think he's really my uncle? Eli looked up, startled by the question. He says so. She nodded but did not seem sure. Feels like he's from before I got lost. He said nothing. The wind had died down outside. The world was still, the way it gets before the thaw, silent, watchful. Lark closed her eyes, clutching the cedar bird tight against her chest. When she finally slept, Eli looked at her face in the glow of the dying fire. He felt the weight of what tomorrow would bring the leaving, the emptiness that would return once she was gone. He knew it before he'd let himself think it. He didn't want her to go. He'd been called many things: fighter, outlaw, brute, but never father. And now the word had started to live in him like a seed, small but stubborn, refusing to die. Outside, the snow began to soften under a shy moon. Somewhere in the woods, a wolf cried once, and then fell silent. Eli sat there until dawn, the knife still in his hand, carving against the ache. The morning broke soft, pale, and heavy with thaw. The air held that strange silence that comes when winter begins to loosen its grip, when the world seems to hold its breath, listening for what might come next. Eli stood at the creek, the handle of the axe resting against his shoulder. The ice had grown thin overnight, breaking easy under the steel. Water moved beneath it with a slow, uncertain music. Behind him, smoke lifted from the cabin chimney. Lark's laughter carried faint and bright through the cold, and it startled him, the sound of it. He'd grown used to her quiet, the still way she moved, as though afraid of breaking something. But now, she laughed, and he turned toward the sound as though it were a thing he'd been chasing all his life. Ben stepped out of the cabin just then, coat buttoned high, face still lined from sleep. You've done right by her, he said, coming to stand beside Eli. She talks about you like you're some sort of guardian angel. Eli let out a breath that might have been a laugh, if not for how it sounded. Ain't never been called that. Ben squinted toward the cabin. She's strong, takes after her ma. I'd say she was lucky you found her, but maybe it was the other way around. Eli didn't answer. He looked out toward the horizon, the line where the snow met sky, where the trail vanished west. Beyond that line waited everything he'd been running from. He could feel it out there. The debts unpaid, the graves unmarked, the weight of a name that carried more ruin than worth. Storm's gone, Ben said after a pause. Road'll be passable by noon. I mean to start south, back to the main trail. He hesitated. You're welcome to ride with us, safer traveling in numbers. Eli shook his head. My road don't run that way. Ben nodded, slow, as if he'd expected it. Still, there'll be folks grateful to meet the man who saved a child's life. Eli met his eyes then, and the look in them made Ben quiet. There ain't no saving in what I done, Eli said softly. Only keeping her breathing till the world found her again. They went inside together. Lark had braided her hair, crooked but proud, and wore a small grin when she saw Eli. Uncle says we can go home, she said, her voice bright but tremoring at the edges. But I told him you don't got one. Eli smiled faint. That so? She nodded. Maybe you can come with us. Ben cleared his throat gently. He's got his own life, Lark. The girl's eyes flickered between them, confusion warring with the understanding that always came too soon to children who'd lost too much. She held up the cedar bird. "Then you take this," she said, thrusting it toward Eli, "so you don't forget me." He stared at the carving, the one he'd shaped by firelight, when she'd slept with his coat around her shoulders. He took it, slow, and ran a thumb along its wing. "I couldn't forget if I tried." Her mouth trembled. "Will you come see me?" He hesitated, searching for an answer that wouldn't break her heart or his own. "Someday," he said. It was enough. For her, it had to be. By noon, the horses were ready. Ben had found Eli's old mount still grazing near the cottonwoods, limping but alive. He'd brushed it down, fed it from his own stores. When Eli saw the animal standing there, patient as a ghost, something in his chest ached deep. Lark climbed into the wagon, turning to wave before they started off. Her hair caught the sunlight like wheat, and for a moment she looked almost like an angel after all. Eli stood by the cabin door, hat low, the cedar bird tucked safe in his pocket. He watched until they were small shapes against the snow. Only then did he turn back inside. The cabin felt too big now, the silence too loud. He stoked the fire out of habit, then let it die. He walked through each room, what little of them there was, and found traces of her everywhere. A strand of pale hair on the pillow, the faint print of her small hand in the dust near the window. He didn't touch any of it. At dusk, he saddled the horse. The sun was setting behind the mountains, bleeding through the clouds like light through old cloth. He looked once more at the horizon, at the fading trail of wagon tracks heading south. Then he turned west, toward the country that had forgotten him. He didn't know where he was going, only that something had changed. The cold still bit, but it no longer felt like punishment. He rode through it slow, steady, the cedar bird warm in his palm. Miles later, when the stars began to gather, he stopped on a rise overlooking the valley. The wind had softened to a whisper, and far below, the land stretched out endless, waiting. He closed his eyes and thought of her voice, of the way she'd said "Pa" that first night, soft, certain, believing. And for the first time in his long, hard life, Eli Warren bowed his head and whispered a prayer. Not for forgiveness, not for mercy, but for the chance to become the man that little girl already believed him to be. The wind carried the words away, folding them into the dark like a promise. He turned the horse west and rode on.